I will say, of course, he was a man of the Enlightenment. Andrew Roberts, the English author I told you about in the beginning of this podcast, called him the Enlightenment on horseback, which I think is a great term. So he brought the Enlightenment to many countries through his conquest, but of course, there's some caveats. People say, "Oh, but he couldn't have been from the Enlightenment. He reestablished slavery in
Mhm.
1802 or 1803," which is true. He reestablishes slavery, not in France, but in the colonies. A great mistake, obviously a great crime, but he does it for economic reasons and not for racial reasons, obviously. I mean, this is one of the many subtleties of his life, and people start screaming so fast, but it's very important to understand why he does it. He does it because with the peace with England, France gets back some of her overseas colonies and he needs money for the country that's devastated by the revolution. And Saint-Domingue, one of the French colonies, is like something like a third or half of all sugar production worldwide. So it's this massive economic benefit. It doesn't excuse what he does at all, but one has to understand the context. And of course, later on, he abolishes slavery on the island of Malta. He abolishes slavery in 1815 when he comes back after the first abdication.
Mhm.
So again, so many paradoxes, so many difficult gray areas, so many things to understand. But overall, I would say he was absolutely a man of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, I mean, during his exile in St. Helena, he allegedly had his enormous library of 2,000 books, right?
Yep,
And
absolutely.
2,000 books at that time was pretty much like Congress library of US today.
Yeah, and it wasn't enough for him. He would go through 2000 in a couple months. I mean, this was not enough at all for him. But it's good you bring up Saint Helena. There's this really amazing moment, which is probably one of my favorite moments of his life. He's walking on Saint Helena, I think like 6 months after he arrived. So it's still the beginning
Mhm.
of the exile. He would spend 5 or 6 years on Saint Helena, so it's still the beginning. He's walking with Mrs. Balcombe, the wife of a very high dignitary, English dignitary on the island from the East India Company. So they're walking together, and she is a British aristocrat, right? Very much of the Enlightenment also, but very antiquated views when it comes to hierarchies, etc. And they cross some slaves who are carrying very heavy boxes. And Mrs. Balcombe walks ahead of the emperor and sort of tells the slaves to get out of the way. Says, "Get out of here. Leave space for the emperor."
Mhm.
And Napoleon stops and tells the woman, "Madam, respect the burden." And this is sort of the idea that the emperor would say that would correct an English aristocrat on how she behaved towards slaves really encapsulates his meritocratic
Mhm.
ethos and his enlightenment ethos. I mean, this is respect to the burden. This is everything, Napoleon. I mean, somebody is working, they're toiling. You respect the work. You respect